Hi, I'm Matthew from Dark Ascent, and today I'll go over the egoistic climber who worshipped Reinhold Messner, the most famous mountaineer alive, and tried to climb exactly the way he did. She refused advice from some of the best guides alive and threw out climbing equipment that could save her life. What happened in the first 2 hours after she walked out of camp is one of the craziest Everest tragedies in recent history. It was May 13th, 2022, and night was coming down hard on the south col of Mount Everest, the last camp before the summit. A frozen saddle of rock and ice sitting at almost 26,000 feet. The col is the doorway to what climbers call the death zone, the altitude where the air is so thin that the human body starts dying faster than it can repair itself, and where nearly every climber on Earth straps on a mask and breathes bottled oxygen just to keep their brain and their fingers alive. The gas does not make the climbing easy, it makes it possible, propping up judgment, warmth, and strength in a place determined to take all three. All across camp that evening, headlamps moved between tents as people checked regulators and counted cylinders for the summit push. And in the middle of all of it, one climber zipped open her tent, stepped out into the wind, and walked right past the stacked bottles with her face bare. Her name was Janelle Pruitt. She was 36 from Boulder, Colorado, and she was nobody's idea of a tourist. She had stood on top of Rainier in a storm, climbed Denali carrying her own loads, summited Aconcagua, and tagged a respectable Himalayan peak the year before. She ran marathons for fun and trained like it was a second job. Winters meant ice routes before dawn and weighted stair climbs after work. Summers meant an altitude tent over her bed, and weekends spent grinding up high peaks with a loaded pack. People who climbed with her described a woman who was strong, organized, and absolutely certain of herself. The kind of partner who never complained and never slowed down. On paper, she was exactly the sort of climber a guide wants on the rope. But here's the thing you have to understand about Janelle before any of this makes sense. She did not really come to Everest to climb a mountain. She came to follow a man. For most of her adult life, she had worshipped one legendary climber the way other people worship prophets. And somewhere along the way, the goal quietly stopped being the summit and became the style, doing it his way, proving she was cut from the same cloth he was. Admiring your heroes is healthy, but I watched her admiration grow into a plan to copy the hardest climb on Earth, and I mean copy it move for move, as if the 40 years in between did not exist. In 1978, a climber named Reinhold Messner and his partner Peter Habeler did something doctors of the era had called flatly impossible. They reached the summit of Mount Everest without bottled oxygen. Physiologists had warned that a human brain simply could not survive that altitude unassisted, that anyone who tried would come back damaged, or not come back at all. When the two men walked back into base camp alive and lucid, they did not just break a record, they broke a belief, and the climbing world spent years arguing about what it meant. 2 years later, Messner returned and did it again, completely alone. He would eventually stand on all 14 of the planet's highest mountains, the giants rising past 26,000 feet, every single one of them without gas, under a philosophy he became famous for, climbing the mountain by fair means or not at all. Janelle owned everything he had ever written. She could recite his routes and his dates the way other people recite song lyrics, and over the years his philosophy had hardened inside her into something close to scripture. To her, bottled oxygen was not safety equipment. It was a shortcut, a way of dragging the summit down to your level instead of rising to meet it. She liked to say, in so many words, that the gas turned the tallest mountain on Earth into a treadmill, and that the long lines of masked climbers shuffling up the ropes every May were not really climbing Everest at all. By the time she reached base camp, everyone on the mountain seemed to know about the American woman planning to go up clean, and she wore the attention like a down suit. Messner spent 20 years building a body that could survive up there, and I cannot stress enough she only had 6 weeks. What she never fully weighed was everything underneath his style. Messner grew up climbing in the Dolomites as a small child and had thousands of routes behind him before he ever saw the Himalaya. He spent years on expedition after expedition, letting his body learn the thin air, the slow way, and he carried a once-in-a-generation engine that no training plan on Earth can manufacture. He also paid for those lessons in ways she preferred not to dwell on, losing his own brother on a mountain and 7 of his toes to frostbite long before Everest. His climbs without oxygen were not a costume you could put on. They were the last page of a very long book. None of it was secret either. It was all printed plainly in the books on her own shelf, page after page. And there was one more thing buried in all those books she loved, something she read right past. The man turned around, constantly. He walked away from summits when the snow felt wrong, when the weather shifted, when his body whispered that the margin was gone, and he never treated those retreats as failures. He treated them as the reason he was still breathing. The style she idolized was never really about refusing oxygen. It was about reading the mountain and himself with brutal honesty and having the humility to go home. Makalu turned him back again and again before he ever reached the top. Daulakiri threw him off twice across the years before it finally let him up, and he obeyed the mountain every single time. People forget how often Messner simply turned around, and those retreats were the one skill I never saw her copy. Going home was never failure to him. It was the whole system. Janelle arrived at base camp with 6 weeks of acclimatization ahead of her, a marathon runner's heart, a backpack of conviction, and almost none of that. Her resume was real, but it was thin in exactly the place this plan needed it to be: thick. Time spent desperately high with no help. She had never been above 25,000 feet in her life. The plan was simple and absolute. She would climb with the team, but from the high camps upward, where every other client would be sleeping and climbing on bottled oxygen, she would touch none of it. The rare climbers who truly pull this off tend to share a profile, a decade of Himalayan seasons, earlier trips above 26,000 feet on bottled oxygen first, and a long record of turning around. She was trying to skip straight to the final exam, and I will be honest with you, on paper the plan did not look insane. It looked disciplined. It had checkpoints and contingencies, neat little rows of them. That is the trap with plans like hers. Paper holds anything you write on it. Paper does not have to breathe at 26,000 feet, and paper has never once been cold. The expedition she joined was run by a veteran leader named Neil Crowder, a quiet man in his 50s with more than 2 decades of Himalayan seasons behind him. And when she told him her intention, he spent the better part of the spring trying to talk her out of it. He had guided strong climbers without gas before, and he told her plainly what separated them from her: years of high rotations, previous trips above 26,000 feet, and a willingness to quit on a moment's notice. She heard all of it the way a believer hears doubt, politely, warmly, and not at all. He even connected her, through mutual friends, with climbers who had actually done Everest without gas, and every one of them told her some version of the same thing. Wait a few years. Climb another giant first. Build the base. She thanked them all and changed nothing. Each time she called bottled oxygen cheating, I wanted to remind her that gas is why most people come home. Crowder could not legally or physically stop a paying client from breathing the air, so he did what good leaders do. He built fences around the risk. She would climb on a strict schedule with hard checkpoints. She would carry a radio and answer it, and whether she liked it or not, a rescue bottle of oxygen with a mask and regulator would travel a few steps behind her the entire way, carried by the strongest climbing Sherpa on his team. Janelle resented that bottle the way some people resent an insult. To her it was not a lifeline, it was an accusation. There would be a hard turnaround time. There would be radio checks at fixed points along the route, and if her speech slurred or her walk wandered, even once, the climb was over on the spot, whether she agreed with the verdict or not. The man assigned to carry it was Mingma, 34 years old, from the village of Forts in the Khumbu Valley, a place that has sent more climbers to the top of Everest than entire countries have. He had 9 summits of his own, every one of them on the sharp end of someone else's ambition, and he had carried clients, hauled loads, and once helped drag a stranger back down from the balcony in a storm. Crowder told him, in so many words, that his only job on summit night was Janelle. Stay close, stay patient, and keep that bottle ready. Neil, her expedition leader, ordered a rescue bottle carried behind her, and that order tells me he saw this coming. Nobody packs a rescue for a climb they believe in. The warnings started weeks before the summit push, and they were not subtle. On the acclimatization rotations, Janelle moved beautifully low on the mountain, and then slowed, hard, every time the team pushed above 23,000 feet. She picked up the dry, hacking cough that haunts every Everest season, except hers kept settling deeper into her chest, turning wet around the edges. And the numbers told their own story. Every camp had a little fingertip pulse oximeter, the cheap drugstore kind, and camp by camp, the oxygen saturation readings it gave her slid lower than anyone else's on the team. Crowder watched the spread between her readings, and everyone else's widened with every rotation, and he started sleeping worse than she did. She had an answer for all of it. The slowing was pacing, she said. The patience of someone climbing by fair means. The cough was just the dry air, the same cough everyone gets. The numbers were a snapshot, not a verdict, and anyway, her hero had climbed into that same air with no oximeter at all. Every symptom that should have been read as a warning got reframed in her head as evidence of effort, proof that she was doing it the hard way, the right way, his way. It is the oldest trap in mountaineering and the most polite one, because nobody around you can prove your story wrong until the mountain does. Her oxygen numbers were screaming at everyone in camp, and it floors me that only she was not listening. Belief is a painkiller. That is the best way I can put it. A strong enough belief will quietly swallow every signal your body sends you and hand you back a story you like better. Janelle was not lying to anyone. She had simply built a version of events where struggling meant succeeding, and inside that version, the worse she felt, the more like him she became. The summit push began in the second week of May, and this is where her path split from everyone else's. The route climbs out of Camp 2 and up the steep blue ice of the Lhotse face to Camp 3, hanging off the slope at about 23,500 feet. And it is there that most clients strap on the mask for the first time and sleep with the gas whispering all night. Sleep is where the gas earns its keep, because a climber resting on oxygen actually recovers a little, while a climber on ambient air at that height just deteriorates more slowly lying down than standing up. Janelle slept on ambient air. The next day she climbed on ambient air over the yellow band and the Geneva spur to the South Col itself, while her body quietly fell behind on a debt it had no way to repay. Watching her climb past 23,000 feet with no gas, I knew she was burning strength she could never get back. By the time she stumbled into camp on the Col on the afternoon of May 13th, she had spent more than a full day above 23,000 feet with no oxygen, and the woman who arrived was not the woman who had left base camp. Teammates watched her take 20 minutes to get her boots off. She could not finish a cup of soup. The cough had gone fully wet, a low rattle riding under every breath, and when she talked, there were pauses in the middle of her sentences where the air simply ran out. She called it tired. The mountain had another word for it. 2 separate teammates went to Crowder that evening, independently, and told him quietly that something was wrong with Janelle. He already knew. In the leader's tent that evening, Crowder did what he had done every night of the expedition and clipped the little oximeter onto her finger. At home, a healthy person reads somewhere in the high 90s. Down at base camp, most of the team had been in the 80s. Climbers resting on bottled oxygen a few tents away were holding in the low 80s, even there, at the edge of the death zone. The number that came back on Janelle's finger started with a 5. He showed it to her without a word, and she looked at it. And what she did next told him everything. She smiled. A blood oxygen level in the 50s would land me in intensive care, but she read hers and smiled. She read a medical emergency like it was a progress report. He laid it out for her one last time, slowly, the way you talk when you need every word to land. The readings, the cough, the rattle he could hear from across the tent. He told her the climb was over, that there were exactly 2 acceptable versions of tomorrow. One where she clipped on a mask and went up like everyone else, and one where she turned around and went down, and that the version she wanted no longer existed. He had buried friends on this mountain. He knew precisely what her body was telling him. Years earlier, he had watched a strong climber die of this exact arithmetic, less than a day after insisting he felt fine, and he told her that story straight to her face. Janelle heard him out, and then she told him, in so many words, that she had not spent 2 years and every dollar she had to climb the world's tallest mountain on a bottle, that the whole point of being here was to do it clean, and that she felt better than the numbers said. He could not handcuff her to a tent. Nepal requires climbers to have support, but no rule on earth lets a guide physically force a determined adult downhill. So Crowder made the only move left on the board. He doubled Mingma's orders, tightened the checkpoints, and prayed she would quit on her own. He gave her one final chance to put on a mask, and I wish ego came with an off switch. At 9:40 that night, the team assembled in the dark to begin the summit push. A procession of headlamps and down suits shuffling toward the fixed line, the wind driving the temperature to 30 below zero before it even started trying. One by one, climbers seated their masks, opened their regulators, and let the gas warm them from the inside. Summit pushes leave at night on purpose. The snow is frozen solid, the wind is usually at its kindest, and the timing puts climbers on top in morning light. with a whole day to get back down. Their world narrowed to the hiss of oxygen and the circle of light at their feet. Janelle stepped into that line with her face open to the night. No mask, no hose, no hiss, just a balaclava crusting with frost around her mouth and the rattle in her chest that everyone pretended not to hear. Mingma fell in a few steps behind her, the rescue bottle riding in his pack, exactly where Crowder had ordered it to be. The clock that no one knew was running started right there, at the edge of camp, at 9:40 in the evening. Climbers from other teams glanced at her uncovered face as they passed, then glanced again, the way drivers look at a car heading the wrong way up a ramp. One bare face in a line of oxygen masks, heading into a -30 night, is an image I cannot unsee. And for the first stretch she held. That is the part nobody who was there can quite let go of. For about 20 minutes, Janelle kept pace with the masked climbers around her, even edging past one or two, looking far steadier than a person in her state had any right to be. The slope above the col is a long, rising ramp of snow and rock, and for those 20 minutes, she went up it like a woman who had finally been proven right about everything. What was actually happening inside her was crueler. Severe oxygen starvation does not always announce itself with pain. At first it can feel like clarity, even mild euphoria, the brain running light and fast right before it begins to fail. The strength she felt in those first 20 minutes was not her body thriving on thin air. It was her body burning its last full tank, and there was no station anywhere above her to refill it. Pilots get warned about this in training, because hypoxia famously convinces its victims they are doing wonderfully, right up until they are not doing anything at all. Those strong first 20 minutes were not strength at all, and I hate that the body lies before it fails. Hypoxia flatters you right up until it drops you. Around 10:15, the engine ceased. Her pace did not fade gradually, it fell off a shelf. 3 steps, then a long sagging pause over her ice axe. 2 steps, then 1. The climbers she had passed so easily came grinding back up to her and moved by, 1 set of headlamps at a time, until she was standing alone in the dark with Mingma, gulping at air that gave her almost nothing back. The men who first climbed this mountain without gas wrote about taking 10 breaths for a single upward step. Mingma moved up beside her and asked, gently, if she wanted the bottle. She shook her head and made herself climb. He dropped back and radioed Crowder, who was climbing a few minutes below, and the 2 men began the quiet choreography that experienced climbers know too well, closing the distance around a person who is coming apart without saying out loud that it is happening. Above them, the route to the balcony went on rising into the night, more than 1,500 vertical feet of it that she was never going to see. 10 breaths for every single step is how the strongest climbers alive describe that altitude, and I promise she was not them. Then the cold came inside. This is the part of climbing without oxygen that almost nobody appreciates. The gas is not just breath, it is heat. A body burning, bottled oxygen can defend its core and push warm blood out to its fingers and toes. A body starved of it cannot, and the cold knows. At 30 below, in wind, the difference is not measured in comfort. It is measured in minutes. Frostbite that takes hours to develop on bottled oxygen can take root in minutes without it, and hers had a head start on a body that could no longer fight back. By 10:30, Janelle had stopped flexing her right hand. Her shivering, which had been violent, was easing, and any mountain medic will tell you that on a night like that, shivering that stops is not improvement, it is surrender. Frost had sealed across her balaclava. Mingma offered the bottle a second time, holding the mask out where she could see it. She pushed his arm away, and her arm, teammates said later, moved like it belonged to someone else. Without the gas, the body cannot even keep itself warm, and the cold taking her fingers first just broke me. By 11:15, she was weaving. Her boots crossed each other. She tipped into the slope, caught herself on the fixed line, stood swaying, and tried to step up again. When Mingma reached her, she was mumbling, and the words came out soft and wrong, like a tape played at the wrong speed. The medical term for what was happening is ataxia, the brain so starved of oxygen that it can no longer run the legs, and on Everest it is famous for one reason. It is usually the last warning a climber ever gets. Mingma keyed the radio and said the words Crowder had been dreading more than all season, and the night reorganized itself around her in seconds. Crowder turned his clients around to hold position. 2 Sherpas from a neighboring team angled across the slope to help. Janelle, a few hundred feet above the tents she had walked out of an hour before, was still trying to climb, one knee in the snow, one mitten pawing at the line, chasing a man who had done this 44 years earlier and chasing him on legs that no longer answered, stumbling like someone 6 drinks deep. She still waved the oxygen away, and I have never wanted to shout louder. And by that point, I am not even sure the refusal was still her. At 11 o'clock, she sat down in the snow, the way exhausted climbers do, and then she could not get up. Not would not, could not. She was at roughly 26,500 feet, 400 vertical feet above camp, an hour and 20 minutes after walking out of it. Her eyes were open, and they were aimed at nothing. The rattle in her chest had become a wet, doubled sound that the men around her could hear over the wind, her lungs filling with the fluid of severe altitude sickness. The kind of failure the doctors of 1978 had feared, arriving right on schedule in a body that had none of the armor. Mingma, her Sherpa, got the oxygen mask on her in under a minute, and it guts me she was past saving. Mingma had the mask out of his pack and sealed over her face in under a minute. The regulator opened all the way, pure oxygen pouring into her at last. It was the one moment her whole philosophy had called cheating, and it changed nothing because the body receiving it was already past the line. They got her onto a tarp and started hauling her down toward the tents. 4 men skidding and heaving on a frozen slope in the dark, and partway down, her breathing went ragged and then shallow, and then, at about 11:25, it stopped. There is no reviving a person up there. No machine, no medicine, no miracle. The altitude takes even that option away. Janelle Pruitt had walked out of camp at 9:40. She was gone within 2 hours, 400 feet above her own sleeping bag with the oxygen mask on her face. She died maybe 400 feet above a camp full of oxygen, and that distance will stay with me. That is a slope she could have walked down in 20 minutes. The men carried her body the rest of the way down to the col, which on that mountain counts as a mercy, and the expedition operator radioed the news down through the camps to the local authorities and eventually to a phone in Boulder, Colorado. The rest of the team abandoned the summit and descended in silence. Days later, a team of Sherpas brought her down the Lhotse face to Camp 2, where a long-line helicopter lifted her off the mountain, and unlike so many of the people Everest keeps, Janelle Pruitt went home. She went home because of the men she had spent the whole climb quietly defying, the leader who fenced in her risk, and the Sherpa who shadowed her with the bottle she called an insult. And that is the bitter center of the story. The man she worshipped earned the right to refuse oxygen across 20 years of mountains and stayed alive by turning around over and over whenever the math went bad. Janelle copied the refusal and skipped everything underneath it. She wanted his summit without his scars, his style without his retreats, and the mountain, which has never once cared what anyone believes, simply ran the numbers. Somewhere in Colorado, there is a shelf of his books with her careful notes in the margins, and the answer she needed was printed in them, all along, in the chapters about turning around and going home. The man she worshipped earned the right to climb without oxygen over a lifetime, and I watched her skip straight there. She copied the one part of him that was never the point.